Okay, so the that I am bringing to the hub tonight, our youth mentors, we're really looking for something, knowing that school is starting and there is a good chance that there's probably some stresses, worries, hard things coming along with that, right? So we also know that back to school looks very, very different this year than it typically does. So I wanted to share this activity with you tonight as a way to remind you, us even, I need those reminders too sometimes, of taking care of ourselves. So this activity is something that I call a self-care garden. So I am going to give you a minute. I'd like you to get a piece of paper and a writing tool. So I'll give you like 30 seconds to grab something like that. So I just have like lined paper, a notebook, and I have a pen. It doesn't have to be pretty. You can make it look pretty. Some people doing that decorative piece, putting the color in is really helpful for them and it is a part of their self-care and feels really good. Some people don't love artsy stuff. And so this is not an art activity necessarily. You don't have to be artistic. It's more the idea of what we're doing through it and the process that's important. So if I can't look at your picture and see what you've done, that's totally okay, because that's not the point. So hopefully you've got a piece of paper, you have something to make marks with, whether it's a pen, pencil, crayons, markers. And so the first thing that I'm going to ask you to do for our self-care garden is I'm going to ask you to make a flower. So before you start making that flower, I just want to make sure you know kind of where we're going a little bit so you can kind of frame that flower in that way that it would be helpful. I don't care what kind of flower you make. It can be whatever kind of flower you want. The only stipulation I have for you is to know that I would like the petals of the flower to be big enough for you to be able to do some writing in it. So I'm gonna make a flower. I typically do a daisy. So I do my circle in the middle, then I do my petals around big enough that I can do some writing in. And then the other piece as well is, let me hold that up so you can see it. And we can make the stem as long or as short as you would like. But what I would like you to know is that we are going to need some space for dirt in the bottom, and we're going to do some filling in of the dirt. So I'm going to do my dirt right there. Pretty stem of my flower and some leaves supporting that flower, holding it up. That's what my flower looks like right now. So take a couple minutes to do that. Again, it can be a super pretty elaborate flower. It can be just like my fairly simple daisy right there, whatever feels best for you. So we're going to start to get a little bit deeper now. The first thing I'm going to get you to do, once you have your flower, you have those petals, is for these petals, what I want you to fill them in with are things that you love about you. If you can fill every one of those petals, amazing. If you can fill one of those petals, amazing. Okay, so this is one of those things that can kind of feel tricky because sometimes I do this activity with people and they start doing it and they're like, I don't have a lot that I love about myself, right? Sometimes that's why we're reaching out for wellness, is because that's a part of it. Self-love is actually really, really hard and a huge journey and a huge process for so many people, but we don't actually realize it, right? And so one of the things that I tell people is one of the reasons we don't actually realize it is because we don't really, it's not a part of our culture and our society to go out into the world and be like, hey, I'm an amazing person. We don't really do that. Right? When's the last time that you went to work, to school, to grocery store, went out somewhere in the world, were with other people and said, hey guys, my hair looks really good today. Like, I really like how my hair looks. Right? We don't do that. Hey, I scored 5 goals at my soccer game yesterday and I played really well. We don't really pay ourselves those compliments to other people, which means we don't actually think about it a lot, right? There's lots of times that I could name when I go out and I see someone that I know and I pay them a compliment, right? Like whether it's something physical, like I really like your shirt or your hair looks really good today, or just like, hey, that thing that you helped me with, like that was so kind of you. Thank you for that. You're such an awesome person. I can think of lots of people that I've said things like that to lately, right? That's a part of our culture. It's a part of what we do as society. And sometimes we kind of have this idea that if we are kind to ourselves and love on ourselves, that we're being selfish or conceited. But you guys, that's a really, really important part of wellness. So as hard as it is to do, it can be really helpful to go there. So I want you to think about what are some of those things that you can put in those petals. And I want you to also give yourself kindness if you're not able to fill all of them, right? I didn't tell you what you were going to have to do with them. So if your flower has like 20 petals, that's a lot to have to fill. And the other thing I want you to think about is that you're not submitting this picture as like an art assignment right now. You're not giving it to Jenna or me. You get to keep this. And so my hope for you too would be that maybe, yeah, today you might only be able to put one in there, one in that petal, but maybe in a week you could add something else. And maybe a week from then you'll think of something else that you love about yourself. But knowing that that flower does deserve that love and kindness, even if you're not able to keep too much on it right now, that's okay. Okay, so that's the flower piece. We're going to move on to the soil. So what do we know about soil in terms of life, not a metaphor right now yet, is that the soil holds the nutrients that that flower needs to be able to grow, to be able to thrive, and essentially to be able to live, right? In order for that flower to not kind of keel over, dry up, shrivel, it has to have those nutrients, right? From the sun, from the soil. It's got to have that water in the soil that it's soaking up. But the soil is a really important piece, right? We know when there's less nutrients in the soil or it's really dry, it doesn't have all those good things. Often there's certain plants that can live there, but there's a lot of plants that actually can't really thrive and do their best in that space. So what I want you to put in your soil, in your picture for your nutrients, here's the metaphor part, is things that you can do to take care of yourself, right? So I know that right now there's a lot of kind of debates out there about what self-care is and, oh, like we have to spend all this money to do self-care. That's not how I view self-care. To me, self-care is things that you can do in that moment that feels good for you. So, for example, one of my favorite things to do for self-care right now is to take a hot bath with a bath bomb. Sometimes my self-care is painting my nails. Sometimes my self-care is walking my dog, right? It feels really good for me. I was going to the park almost every night to see the swans, right? Sometimes self-care is looking at a picture that makes us feel good. I am one of the pug obsessed people. And so there is like this Irish pug video on YouTube that I cannot watch without giggling hysterically. So if I'm having a hard time thinking of things to make me feel good, I know that that's my go-to. I can go watch that video and it's going to fill up my cup. So I want you to think of things that you can put in the soil. They can be really easy, really simple, right? They don't have to cost money. They don't even have to be things that other people might enjoy or think of. I have a dancing baby Groot. Sometimes self-care is making baby Groot dance because it's cute and it's funny and it fills my cup, right? It can look like whatever it needs to look like for you, what is ever helpful for you. And those are going to be the nutrients in that soil that is going to help that flower grow and feel good. Sometimes maybe it's a candle, maybe it's putting on fuzzy socks. One of my other favorite things to talk about is burritoing. So taking a really nice, I like warm fuzzy blankets personally, but a nice blanket, whatever that looks like for you, tucking it over my feet, wrapping up like a burrito, watching a movie. That's self-care, right? Whatever that looks like for you, those things that are going to fill your cup up, help you feel good. You come home from a hard day, if I had a magic wand and allowed you to have that time for you whenever you needed it, what would that look like? Let's take a few seconds for that. And the other piece too, that I want to say about that too is that I maybe should have said at the beginning, I apologize. You can write those things in the soil. You can draw a picture of what that would look like, whatever works for you. And why I really like having them actually there in the soil for you to see is because oftentimes when we really need that self-care, we're kind of tired maybe or having a hard time. And it's really easy to forget that we actually have things that we can do, right? We forget that there's things in our home accessible to us that we can grab that feel good right now, right? And so in a space where we're feeling calm, we're feeling good, it's a lot easier to put those in the soil, right? It's a lot easier to think about them right now. I have a whole list right now. But I can almost promise you that at 9 o'clock tonight, when I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired and I just want to go to bed, but really I'm like, I need self-care, I need to fill my cup back up. It's going to make my life a lot easier if I have a smorgasbord ready to go, things that I can choose from right in front of my face. Okay, so the next part of our self-garden is a little bit trickier, I think at least. We are going to put some weeds into our garden. So I know that probably sounds super counterintuitive, not like something that you would usually do. We don't usually plant weeds. I like the dandelions. I know that's an unpopular opinion, but the reason we're going to put the weeds into our self-care garden is because it's really important to acknowledge that they exist. Right? I can love myself to the moon and back. I can have a list of 100 things I love about myself. I can do self-care out the wazoo every night, have an hour of self-care. But there are always going to be stresses that I experience in my life because that's a reality. And so pretending that those stresses don't exist is actually not helpful. And so tonight, I wanted to really focus on anxieties, worries, stresses that we may have specifically about school. And so part of the reason that I want to do that is because obviously school's coming up, we're getting ready for it. But I also think that sometimes we spend a lot of time kind of avoiding those stresses because they're hard. So obviously, right? Of course we do. We don't want to spend time thinking about them because they make us feel icky. So why would we be like, hey, stress, come hang out with us right now when we don't have to? But the hard part about that is if we don't know that that stress and we don't acknowledge that that stress exists, we can't necessarily deal with it. We can't necessarily prepare for it. And then we sometimes end up having kind of big reactions that we don't really understand why we're having, right? So for example, I'm someone that gets hangry, right? That's the perfect example of sometimes I get angry and it's really just because I'm hungry, but I don't understand what's going on in my body, and I don't understand what thought is contributing to that anger until I'm able to clue in that, oh yeah, I really just need a snack right now. That's what's making these feelings happen, right? So sometimes that happens where we have the stress and we don't acknowledge it. We don't really realize it's there because we're not thinking about it and we're avoiding it. And then we have a big reaction to something like my dog whining. I'm like, why can't you just be quiet? When like, really, he just needs to pee, not a big deal. Or when my mom says, okay, Kristen, go put your laundry away, right? I know that's not a big deal, but if I have this underlying stress that I haven't acknowledged, don't really know is there, I might have a really big reaction and then be like, whoa, where did that come from? So I want you to take some time right now and I want you to put weeds in your garden. So I'll show you what my weeds look like. I never know how to draw weeds, so mine look like seaweed. So you do you, whatever works for you. That's what my weed looks like. Okay, so as many stresses or worries that you have about school coming up, COVID related or not, right? Because there's typically a lot of worries that we may have about school that exist even when COVID is not a thing, right? So whatever worries, stresses you may have about this upcoming school year, put them in there. And then after you draw them, I want you to write in that weed what that stress or worry is. It doesn't have to be a whole sentence, but I want you to write, like kind of label it for me. Okay, because again, if I understand that thought that's kind of driving that worry or stress for me, then I can deal with it, because I might see that thought on that weed or that worry or that stress, and I might be like, oh, I have ways that I can problem solve that. I have ways that I can deal with that, or I can change that thought. I can do something about it. So it's really helpful to really see it in front of us. That acceptance piece can really be big, right? We spend a lot of time pushing that to the side and pretending it doesn't exist, and then it tends to kind of hit us in the face. Okay, so take a minute, write down those stresses, make those weeds. Again, they can look like seaweed, they can look like dandelion, they can look like whatever, vines, I don't know. Whatever you would like your weeds to look like. Give you a couple of seconds to do that and finish that up. Okay, so if you're not done, totally okay. Again, you do you, take the time that you need, whatever feels most comfortable for you. I want you to look at the garden with me. So I have flower, I have my soil, and I have my weeds that are not so pretty, but weeds never are, right? It's kind of the function of them. So what I want you to think about is, again, really want to hit home, have this self-care stuff happening. It's feeding my flower, right? So my flower is going to feel good. It's going to be able to do the things that it needs to be able to grow, right? So I tell people all the time, I talk to people like every day of the week about how to do things for them and how to use strategies and how to communicate in a healthy way and how to do all these positive things. I'm still working on that in my personal life, right? I know how to do it. I teach people to do it all the time, but it doesn't mean that I'm like, oh yeah, I can just do that now. I don't have a magic wand. It's hard for me too, right? So it's a lot easier to do those things though when we're putting those nutrients back into the soil, and then we have the energy to be able to do the things that we can do for that growth and to keep going with that self-love and the things that we love about ourselves, right? Because that's a lot easier when we're able to be our best selves, because we have the energy and we have the things and the tools that we need to be able to do that, right? So for that flower to grow, that self-care has to keep happening. And sometimes we can kind of tend to make excuses, right? Even for our self-care. I know that these things down here make me feel really good, but sometimes I kind of talk myself out of doing them because I'm tired. I'm like, well, my self-care tonight will just be going to bed earlier. But really, I know that when I'm doing those intentional things to pour back into my cup, that's actually really beneficial. And I know for me personally, I need that, right? So even if I'm tired, or even if I feel like I don't have time, I need to remind myself that I deserve that time for me. I deserve to feel good. And it's going to help me. Tomorrow, I'm going to feel so much better if I take that time for me tonight and do the things that I need. Almost every night, probably, when I finish work, I take Oliver for a walk at like 7-ish. Oliver's my dog. I don't think I mentioned his name. But almost every night I have a moment where I'm like, I'm really tired. I don't want to go tonight. And almost every night I finish my walk and I'm like, whoa, I feel so good right now. I'm so glad that I did it, right? So we don't typically regret the self-care that we do. We might regret if we don't do it. Here's the thing though. Those nutrients in the soil, they feed the flower, they help it grow. They don't do anything for the weeds, right? The more self-care that we do, it doesn't actually help the weeds. It actually shrinks the weeds. So while my flower is growing, those weeds and those stresses tend to get smaller because I'm more available to deal with them. I'm more available from that growth and that big that bigness of the flower that's grown, right? Because of all that self-care, that I'm able to manage them, right? So the more self-care that I'm doing, the more those weeds are shrinking, the more easily I can deal with them, the more available I am to make them smaller or maybe even chop them out, right? If I'm so exhausted at the end of the day and I haven't done anything to fill my cup back up, I'm also too exhausted to do anything about those weeds, and they're probably going to end up growing, right? And we don't want those weeds to get more unmanageable. We want to keep them under wraps. We know the weeds are going to be there. We know that there's going to be stresses in our garden. That's going to exist, but also that's okay. And it's okay to have a hard time with them. And it's okay to feel like I can't get all these weeds out, right? Sometimes it kind of feels like we're just like slapping a Band-Aid on or putting out the fire to get to the next one. Those weeds are going to exist, and that's okay. Because when we're doing that self-care and we're taking care of that flower so that it can grow, it can still grow and thrive even with those weeds existing. We don't have to get them all out. We're not going to get them all out, and that's okay. So if you didn't finish your self-care garden, I encourage you to take time, whether it's throughout the rest of the hub or later tonight, maybe take time to keep working on that self-care garden. Again, if you put color in it, great. If you don't, great, whatever works best for you. But I also encourage you to put it somewhere where you're not going to lose it, maybe where you can see it, right? Because sometimes we need those reminders. It's really easy to move away from, or actually it's really easy to have those moments of like, yeah, I'm so like, that's a great idea. I'm going to do all these things for me. And then it's really easy to move away from that, right? But if this is a reminder in a place where I'm going to see it and I'm going to have it, I'm more likely to follow through with it and do those things that I need to do for me. Yeah, so that's my self-care garden. So thanks everybody. And I really hope you enjoyed that activity. So Jenna, I'll get you to stop recording.